the snow to come out to our mostly annual poetry service. I think we've been having a poetry service mostly annually since I got here 20-some years ago. And I've talked to some charter members who say that it was going on before we got here. For the last few years, we've tried to pick a theme for the poetry. And I must admit that I was having a hard time with this year's theme, which is identity. It sounded kind of new age and weird to me, but one morning, listening to National Public Radio before I woke up, I heard a story about the poet laureate of South Carolina. Every year, it's a tradition that the poet laureate of South Carolina reads a two-minute poem at the inauguration of the governor. And Nikki Haley, the governor of South Carolina, was being inaugurated a few weeks ago. And it turns out that Marjorie Wentworth, who is the poet laureate of South Carolina, had written a poem for the last 3 inaugurations. She said they were sort of safe poems about nature and animals and things like that, and didn't cause much of a stir. But before the inauguration this year, we had all of the shootings of young black men and all of the uprisings around the country, and she thought, maybe I'll write something more serious this year. Maybe I ought to write something that, you know, has a theme that's more pertinent to what's going on in the state. So she wrote an identity poem, I think, about the state of South Carolina. And she submitted the poem before the inaugural, and right away she got back a message that they didn't have 2 minutes in the inauguration. The inauguration must have been too long. So I got a little bit more excited about identity poems. It seems like identity poems can be dangerous. Anyway, I liked the poem, and I thought that it would be a good way to start off today's poetry service. The poem is called One River, One Boat by Marjorie Wentworth, and she starts it off with a line from Elizabeth Alexander which says, "I know there's something better down the road." Because our history is a knot we try to unravel while others try to tighten it, we tire easily and fray the cords that bind us. The cord is a slow-moving river spiraling across the land in a succession of S's splintering near the sea. Picture all of us crowded onto a boat at the last bend in the river. Watch children stepping off the school bus. Parents late for work, grandparents fishing for favorite memories, teachers tapping their desks with red pens, firemen suiting up to save us, nurses making rounds, baristas grinding coffee beans, dock workers unloading apartment-sized containers of computers and toys from factories across the sea. Every morning, different veterans stand at the base of the bridge holding a cardboard sign with misspelled words and an empty cup. In fields at daybreak, rows of migrant farm workers standing on ladders break open iced peach blossoms, their breath rising and resting above frozen fields like clouds. A john boat drifts down the river. Inside, a small boy lies on his back. Hands laced behind his head, he watches stars fade from the sky and dreams. Consider the prophet John calling us from the edge of the wilderness to name the harm that has been done, to make it plain and enter the river and rise. It's not about asking for forgiveness. It's not about bowing our heads in shame, because it all begins and ends here. While workers unearthed trenches at Gladstone's Wharf where 100,000 Africans were imprisoned within brick walls, awaiting auction, death, or worse. Where the dead were thrown into the water and the river clogged with corpses has kept centuries of silence. It is time to gather at the water's edge and toss wreaths into this watery grave. It is time to praise the judge who cleared George Steiny's name 70 years after the fact. We honor him, we pray. Here, where the Confederate flag still flies beside the State House, haunted by our past, conflicted about the future, at the heart of it, we are at war with ourselves, huddled together on this boat, handed down to us, stuck at the last bend of a wide river splintering near the sea.
Yes.
So, it's always good to listen to NPR at 5 in the morning. We're gonna split up the poetry reading, but I'm gonna read one more poem. This is sort of a poet's identity poem. It's called Constantly Risking Absurdity, and it was written by Lawrence Ferlinghetti. Constantly risking absurdity and death whenever he performs above the heads of his audience, the poet, like an acrobat, climbs on rhyme to a high wire of his own making and balances on I-beams above a sea of faces, paces his way to the other side of the day, performing entr'actes and sleight-of-foot tricks and other high theatrics, all without mistaking anything for what it may not be. For he is the super realist who must perforce perceive taut truth before the taking of each stance or step in his supposed advance toward that still higher perch where beauty stands and waits with gravity to start her death-defying leap, and he, a little Charlie Chaplin man, who may or may not catch her fair eternal form spread-eagled in the empty air of existence.
This is The Song of Myself by Walt Whitman. I'm not going to read the whole thing because, as you probably know, it's very long. This is an excerpt. I celebrate myself and sing myself for what I assume you shall assume, for every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you. I loaf and invite my soul. I lean and loaf at my ease, observing the spear of summer grass. I have heard what the talkers were talking, the talk of the beginning and the end, but I do not talk of the beginning and the end. There was never any more inception than there is right now, nor any more youth or age than there is now, and never, will never be any more perfection than there is now, nor any more heaven or hell than there is right now. Out of this dimness, opposite equals advance, always substance and increase, always a knit of identity, always distinction, always a breed of life. Now I'm going to share Emily Dickinson's number 508. I'm seated. I've stopped being theirs. The name they dropped upon my face with water in the country church is finished using now, and they can put it with my dolls. My childhood and the string of spools I've finished threading too. Baptized before without the choice, but this time consciously of grace, unto supremest name, called to my full the crescent dropped, existence, whole arc filled up with one small diadem. My second rank, too small the first, crowned crowning on my father's breast, a half unconscious queen, but this time adequate, erect, with will to choose or to reject, and I choose just a crown.
woman's view of her identity from Eleanor Wiley, a turn of the 20th century poet. Let no charitable hope. Now let no charitable hope confuse my mind with images of eagle and of antelope. I am in nature none of these. I was being human, born alone. I am being woman, heart beset. I live by squeezing from a stone the little nourishment I get. In masks outrageous and austere, the years go by in single file, but none has merited my fear, and none has quite escaped my smile.
This is entitled Man. It's by Langston Hughes. I was a boy then. I did not understand. I thought that friendship lay in the grip of hand to hand. I thought that love must be her body close to mine. I thought that drunkenness was real in wine. But I was a boy then. I didn't understand the things a young lad learns so soon when he's a man.
Sometimes, as that poem indicated, we can all have changing views of our own identity, and sometimes, even as adults, we have confusion about it. And I have two poems now, one by a Jewish poet and another one by Langston Hughes. Lewis Simpson wrote An American Peasant, and you can see how this gives kind of a comical take on what someone's identity is assumed to be. An American Peasant. I am swept in a taxi to the door of a friend. He greets me like a statue fixed in the position of a man who always marries the wrong woman. Then he starts to argue about Black Power, Che Guevara, the SDS. He is hardening into an attitude and becoming an authority. He is writing a series of political articles. There are little bits of toilet paper where he's cut himself shaving. Through a window, I can see the park with people sitting on the benches. The Fifth Avenue bus goes by, then a man with a white cane, then a dog crossing the road at an angle. It must have discovered something mixed with the odor of crankcase oil and dust, a delirious fragrance of sexual life. What's the use? You're not listening. You're right. I have always lived as though I knew the reason. Like a peasant, I trust in silence, and I don't believe in ideas unless they are unavoidable. Only yesterday, Thanksgiving, in the middle of dinner, as I rocked to and fro with a toothache, my wife said, "At last you have learned Daminen to pray." And here's Langston Hughes' theme for English B. The instructor said, "Go home and write a page tonight, and let that page come out of you, then it will be true." I wonder if it's that simple. I am 22, colored, born in Winston-Salem. I went to school there, then Durham, then here to this college on the hill above Harlem. I am the only colored student in my class. The steps from the hill lead down into Harlem through a park. Then I cross St. Nicholas, 8th Avenue, 7th, and I come to the Y, the Harlem Branch Y, where I take the elevator up to my room, sit down, and write this page. It's not easy to know what is true for you or me at 22, my age. But I guess I'm what I feel and see and hear. Harlem, I hear you. Hear you, hear me, we two, you, me, talk on this page. I hear New York, too. Me, who? Well, I like to eat, sleep, drink, and be in love. I like to work, read, learn, and understand life. I like a pipe for a Christmas present, or records, Bessie, Bop, or Bop. I guess being colored doesn't make me not like the same things other folks like who are other races. So will my page be colored that I write? Being me, it will not be white. But it will be a part of you, instructor. You are white, yet a part of me as I am a part of you. That's American. Sometimes perhaps you don't want to be a part of me, nor do I often want to be a part of you. But we are, that's true. As I learn from you, I guess you learn from me. although you're older and white and somewhat more free. This is my page for English B.
Wow.
I love that poem. I married a teacher. This next poem is about our identity with spirituality or religion. It's by Edward Hirsch, and it's called God and Me. The stars look like a broken belt glittering over the lakes and mountains. The moon looks like a tilted crown. Down here, there's a whole lot of racket in churches and bedrooms. Some good folks are speaking in tongues and raising the rafters. I wonder if the good Lord ever gets tired of so much flattery from the fundamentalists. He probably likes it better than all the complaints and entreaties. I'm standing up to listen, but he has nothing to say to atheists. It would be nice to believe that heaven is like a schoolyard in which everyone gets chosen, even the laggards. My friends are seekers and exiles who won't desert the stories. Me, I can't give him up, but I can't believe in him either. It's a one-sided relationship, I with thou. He has whole galaxies to worry about. I don't suppose he gets too worked up about my puny self. Is more real to me than his immense non-being. I'm a teeny void with attributes, with my own little river of tears. But what is he who fills the world with trees and stars and leaves us alone with our wars and atrocities, our deadly human nature, our sad domination over the fish and fowl? Look, no one knows why there is so much silence in the upper spheres and so much suffering down here. The Almighty skipped over our houses.
Sometimes poets, as we all do, make guesses or speculation or try to assume another person's identity. Sort of, what is that person thinking about? What makes him or her tick? And so I'd like to read a particularly searing example of this, somewhat in honor of the start of Black History Month, too. Woody Guthrie, the great American folk singer and balladeer, wrote this and sang it to a tune, The Great Dust Storm, but I will now say it, and it's his attempt to get into an incident that happened right after World War II. It's called The Blinding of Isaac Woodard. My name is Isaac Woodard. My tale I'll tell you. I'm sure it'll sound so terrible you might not think it true. I joined up with the army. They sent me overseas to the battles of New Guinea and in the Philippines. On the 13th day of February of 1946, they sent me to Atlanta, and I got my discharge pin. I caught the bus for Winsboro, going to meet my wife. Then we were coming to New York City to visit my parents both. About an hour out of Atlanta, the sun was going down. We stopped the bus at a drugstore in a little country town. I walked up to the driver and I looked him in the eye. I'd like to go to the washroom if you think we got time. The driver started cursing and then he hollered no. So then I cussed right back at him and really got him told. He said, if you will hurry, I guess I'll take the time. It was in a few short minutes we was rolling down the line. We rolled for 30 minutes. I watched the shacks and trees. I thought of my wife in Winsboro waiting there for me. In Aiken, South Carolina, the driver, he jumped out. He came back with a policeman to take me off the bus. Listen, Mr. Policeman, I started to explain. I did not cause no trouble and I did not raise no cane. He hit me with his billy. He cursed me up and down. Shut up, you black bastard, and he walked me down in town. As we walked along the sidewalk, my right arm he did twist. I knew he wanted me to fight back, but I never did resist. Have you your army discharge? I told him, yes, I had. He pasted me with his loaded stick down across my head. I grabbed a stick and we had a little run, had a little wrestle, when another cop ran up with a gun and jumped into the battle. If you don't drop that sack, black boy, it's me that's dropping you. So I figured to drop that loaded sack was the best thing I could do. They beat me about the head and face and left a bloody trail, all down along the sidewalk to the iron door of the jail. He knocked me down upon the ground and he poked me in the eyes. When I woke up next morning, I had found my eyes were blind. They drug me to the courtroom and I could not see the judge. He fined me $50 for raising all the fuss. The doctor finally got there, but it took him 2 whole days. He handed me some drops and salve and told me to treat myself. It's now you've heard my story, there's one thing I can't see, how you could treat a human like they have treated me. I thought I fought on the islands to get rid of their kind, that I can see the fight lots plainer now that I am blind. And finally, a bit more lighthearted and somewhat confused attempt to guess at another person's identity. This is a poem again by an American poet, Irving Feldman, called Meeting in Lyon. The winter night gives birth before me. It is you hurrying from the mists of Lyon, between the new hotel and the Place Carnot. Shock of dullish hair, widow's peak, dead uncle's baggy suit, dead nephew's bursting coat, dirty collar, varicose tie, suitcase so torn you've webbed it with cord. In broken French you ask for the bus to Bordeaux. In broken French I answer, crying out, "That way, sir," with confident misdirection, never dreaming you'll go, yet off to rush, limping grandly, swinging your free elbow. What business could you ever have in Bordeaux? Might as well ask for the bus to Budapest, the bus to Chicago, Oslo, Maracaibo. Why kid me, a stranger in the street, asking for outlandish places, pretending a life to live, and all that says history, property, people, God, that whole landscape of the arbitrary to give you breath, to call you darling. And so you go, country on your back, selves in a satchel, a cipher becoming the century. Powerless, you do nothing, recur like a myth, echoing around the corner, stepping off boldly on the wrong foot toward the empty provinces of rain. And now would you all stand as you are able to join me in our final hymn.